Hello everyone, and welcome back to another video with On Point Politics. And today we're going to be looking at the latest state averages from 538 and applying the error from every single state in terms of the polling to see what would happen if the polls do underestimate Donald Trump once again. Hit the like button and subscribe for more content just like this. And so, looking at the map for map.judaction, these are all of the results from the previous election cycle. And what we're going to do is we're going to compare the state polling averages for some of these states and look at the error between 2020 and the actual 2020 result and see what that would look like when applied to the current state average. So, looking at the state of Washington, we'll go ahead and see if there even is any polling for this matchup. And there is one poll right now with Harris plus 14, another that's Harris plus 5, which is really interesting. That was done in early July, but the only one that was done post dropout is Harris being up by 14 points in a Democrat-sponsored poll. And looking at the average in the previous cycle, we can see that Joe Biden was leading by 23 points and he only won the state by 19.2%. So this is going to put the state of Washington in the likely Democrat column, which is actually where I have it at right now, by the way. I have it at a 10 to 15 percentage point win, but this brings it down to a little bit above 10%. Looking at the state of Oregon, we will see that the average has Biden up by 21.3%, and she only ended up winning the state by 16.1%. And what's kind of interesting is if you actually go over here, there's literally one poll here from the Harris matchup with 45% to Trump's 40% with Kennedy involved. And we see that the polling error is a little bit over a 5-point miss. It's a little bit over a 5-point miss. So if you were to apply the same polling error to the one Harris plus 5 poll that we have right now, Trump would actually be up in the state of Oregon, which is pretty crazy. Now, don't take this exactly for word. This is not an official prediction, but merely what would happen if we took the polling errors from the previous cycle and applied it to the latest maps. And we see Donald Trump would actually be winning Oregon based off that singular poll. Now, looking at the state of Nevada, we're going to go ahead and look at it because right now Harris is up by 1.2% in the average, and Joe Biden led the average by 5.3% and only won the state by 2.4%. So that's around a 3-point miss. And so looking at that, that actually puts the state of Nevada into the lean Republican column for the former president, since he was underestimated in 538's average just 4 years ago. Looking at the state of Alaska, we're going to see that right now in the average, we saw Donald Trump led by 7.7 percentage points. He ended up winning the state by 10.1, so around a 2 and change point polling error. And right now, Donald Trump is up in the latest poll from April against Biden by around 25 points. So this is more than likely just going to go in the safe column regardless. Looking at the state of Arizona right now, we will go to the latest average. Basically, Harris is up by 0.1%. And the average in 2020 overestimated Joe Biden by around 2.3 percentage points. And so that puts the state into a lean margin of victory for the former president, and he's getting closer to 200 electoral college votes. Colorado is another fascinating one. If we go to the state of Colorado, the latest poll, we don't actually have any Harris matchup numbers, I believe. There are no Harris numbers here, but the latest poll from June 17th to the 24th does have Biden up 10 and a liberal-leaning pollster, by the way. And so when looking at this, we will actually go ahead and look at the 2020 average, and we see that average actually underestimated Joe Biden by around a point. So that puts the state at around 11-point victory for Harris. Again, there hasn't been any polling data out of there, but that's kind of what's being shown. New Mexico is sort of a similar story too. Not a lot of polling, between them, except these two polls, which are overstating Democrat support in the state and underestimating Republicans by quite a bit in their party ID samples. And if we applied the polling error there, we'll see that, he won the state by, Biden won the state by around 11 points. And the average did actually overestimate him very slightly. So this does put Harris at around a 10-point win in New Mexico, even though I do think it's going to be way closer than this. The state really hasn't been polled enough, and there's a huge sampling error in the polling data right now. Looking at the state of Hawaii, this is another fascinating one, because if we actually take a look, the only poll that came out of here with 250 registered voters has Biden only up by 8 in the state. And because there are no Harris matchup numbers and the polling, the error there is actually pretty bad. I probably will put them in the safe column for now, just because there is no Harris matchup polling between them. You could arguably do the same for Colorado as well. Looking at Texas, we will see that the latest poll from the Lone Star State has Trump up by 5 points in the public policy polling. But if you look at 2020, the average did underestimate him by around 4.5% effectively. And so if you were to apply that to that, basically that singular poll or this kind of average, Trump would be up in the higher single digits, anywhere from 8 to 10 points in the state. Now, Nebraska's second is really interesting because the polling data here is really bad for Trump. Harris is up 8 in a poll, and it actually underestimated Biden last time, so we're going to leave that in the likely column for the sake of this video, even though I do think that Nebraska second is going to be a lot more competitive than what is being shown here. Iowa is going to go in the safe Republican column. All the polls have underestimated Trump. They all show Trump with a mid double digit lead. If we go to the average right now, there really hasn't been any polling between Trump and Harris, so that's kind of what we're looking at. The only really accurate pollster from the state, Seltzer & Co., had Trump up 18, and they're actually hiding a Trump plus 19 poll out of the state, which is really fascinating. So, and the average has always underestimated Trump there, so more than likely Trump is probably on track to win this state by possibly over 20 points, which would be insane. Looking at the state of Ohio, we see kind of the same thing. Harris, about 3 polls. This would average out to about 11-ish, and the polling data last cycle underestimated Trump by quite a bit. It underestimated him by a little bit over 7 points, actually. And so if you were to apply that to that 11-point average lead, Trump would be up in the state by effectively 17 to 18 points, possibly even more than that. So again, that's pretty crazy. And looking at a state like Florida, this is another fascinating development too, because Florida right now in the average, underestimated Donald Trump in the state by 5 points. And when you look at the average right now, Trump is up by 4.2%, and he's actually kind of expanded his lead again in the average. But if you were to apply that 5-point error, he wins the state by 9, even though I actually do think he's going to win it by a little bit more than 9. It may be in the mid double-digit margins per se. Georgia is another state to look at, because Harris is up in the average by 0.2%, and the average did overestimate Joe Biden by about a point. And so this does actually put Donald Trump in the driver's seat in the state right now. It does put him at around a lean margin in the state of Georgia. So again, very fascinating stuff. Looking at North Carolina, we're going to see a very similar development there. It's literally a tilt margin in the average, but the polling error was really bad here. Biden was ahead by 1.9%, and he ended up winning by 1.3. That's a little bit over a 3-point polling miss, so that puts the state in the lean Republican column too. And looking at Illinois, we see kind of the same thing. I mean, the average actually underestimated Joe Biden by about a point there, and the latest poll here does have Biden up by 10, so I guess 11-point win. But since there is no Harris matchup numbers, I'm assuming we're just going to put it in the safe column for now. And so Donald Trump's already winning the Electoral College with the Sunbelt states and Oregon in this video, which is kind of funny. Looking at Virginia, this is another interesting state, because the latest 3 polls, plus some of these back here, are actually, if you were to average this out, Harris would be leading the average by a little bit less than 3 points. And this state was a 10-point victory last time, and the average had Joe Biden up by 11.8%. And so, I mean, that puts the state in the 1 to 2 point category for Harris. Not a great sign for a state like Virginia. And if Virginia is that close, the chance of New Mexico being a 10 to 11 point victory for Harris is just basically impossible. There's no way she'd be winning New Mexico by 11, but only be winning Virginia by 1 or 2. They have somewhat similar demographics when it comes to the white voters there. And so it just wouldn't make any sense at all. And so looking at some of the Rust Belt states, we can go to Minnesota. We'll see right now in the average, Harris is up by 8.7%. The average did overestimate Biden by a little bit over 2 points. So this does put, right now, this does put Harris at around a slightly likely lead in the state of Minnesota in this particular video, just looking at the polling errors. Wisconsin, this one's bad because Harris is up by 2.8%, but the polling error was abysmal here. You're talking about Biden winning by 0.6, and the polling lead was plus 8.4. And so when you apply that error, Trump is actually up in the state by over 5 points. So again, very fascinating stuff out of Wisconsin when you apply the polling error there. And looking at Michigan, Harris is actually up by 3. And if you look at the polling error, Biden was up by 7.9% in the average, and Biden only won the state by 2.8. That's a 5.1 percentage point polling miss. So when you apply the error, Trump is up in the state by 2.1, which is fairly similar to what my current moving average has Michigan at as well. Looking at Pennsylvania, we have the same exact thing. Harris at 1.7%. Joe Biden led the average by 4.7, and he only ended up winning by 1.2. That's a 3.5 point polling miss. So when you apply that to the average, Trump would probably be up in the state by about 1.5 to 2 points right now. And looking at a state like New York, this one's interesting because I think we only have about, basically in the average, we have about a few polls, and we actually have a poll ourselves here, which is pretty interesting. But if we were to average this out, I'm not even including ActiVote in our average. We're not even including them because they're the worst pollster in the world. They had a Michigan poll that had an unweighted sample of D plus 45 that took them a month to complete. We're not even including this plus 17 poll into this. But if we look at Harris plus 12 plus 14, well, that would be the head-to-head. So plus 12 plus 11 plus 11, that averages out to around 11. And if you look at the polling error, I mean, the average had Biden up 29.4. He ended up winning the state by 23.1. That's over 6 points. And so this actually puts the state at just a 5-point victory for Kamala Harris in this video, even closer than Minnesota, which is really fascinating when you look at that polling error in New York, almost just as bad as Wisconsin's polling error, which is really interesting. Looking at, Maine, this one's going to be an interesting one because this state overestimated Joe Biden by quite a bit, by a few points, by about 4. The first district actually underestimated Joe Biden there by 3. And if we look at the second district, it really underestimated Trump there by a whopping possibly 9 points there. And so when we look at the current polling there now, I mean, the average in the at-large, kind of vote right now, if you were to average this out, Harris probably would be up by a likely margin, even with the polling error adjusted. Same thing for Maine's first, but Maine's second would probably be likely Republican at the end of the day. So that's what we'd be looking at there. New Hampshire, again, another interesting state as well. The latest average has Harris up by 7.2. The average did overestimate Harris by about, we see this here, about 2 points or so. Or no, it's actually 4 points. So when you apply that error to this current one, Harris is leading the average by a little bit less than 5. Connecticut is another interesting one. I don't think there's any Harris numbers. Same thing for New Jersey, Delaware, or Rhode Island. So we're going to be filling these in safe just because there is no, polling there right now in terms of a Trump-Harris matchup. But this is the completed map. So if every single state right now, their current averages were underestimated by the same amount they were in the last election cycle, Donald Trump would be winning 320 electoral college votes to Harris's 218 electoral college votes. Make sure to hit the like button and to subscribe if you want more content just like this. And I will see you guys in the next video.